people that represent other companies that have expressed an interest in being strategic investors, strategic partners. And what I didn't know at the beginning of this process is strategic can mean follow on. So there's a lot of interest in being the second to the table.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 62. Today, we're talking about strategic partnerships. Now, we all know the importance of strategic partners, especially if you're a new business. But I thought it would be interesting to talk with someone that's been a strategic partner and has also gone through the process of securing other strategic partners, sort of getting the story from both sides. Stephen Smith is President of Ultravance Corporation, a company that works with select UAS manufacturers and end users, helping them land new customers. He has played a pivotal role in introducing 3D printing, 3D LCDs, and has worked for years with UAV systems. Steve was the top sales engineer at 4 companies and has extensive experience working internationally. Recently, Steve partnered with Mike Pick, CEO of startup SkyFallX, to develop strategic partnerships to move the new company forward. He's here to talk about his background in technology and the UAV industry, and his role with SkyFallX as a strategic partner. He'll also talk about the efforts and the challenges to secure other strategic partners. So if you have a background in business or technology and are interested in working with UAS companies and developing strategic partnerships, then Steve's insight should be valuable. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Steve to introduce himself.
My name's Steve Smith. I'm a principal in a couple of different companies. One is Ultravance Corporation, which is a consulting company that is working strictly in the unmanned aerial vehicle and services industry. And the other one is SkyFallX, which is an automatic parachute deployment system and a company that's created that for multicopters primarily. So those are the 2 companies that I'm most directly involved with.
Let's start with Ultravance Corporation. What does it do and how did it get started?
Originally I thought it was going to be a contract sales company. I have a lot of experience in business development, sales and marketing, and over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, specifically in unmanned systems. So I thought that by hanging out my shingle, going out on my own as a consultant, it was going to be primarily sales related. But as this turned out, I have a manufacturing engineering background. I have an MBA certificate from Tulane. I have a background in business. And so it's kind of morphed into a company that involves application engineering, which is the business of putting the correct technology with a requirement. Sometimes it's not always obvious what technology is going to meet that need best, and then putting those various items together into a coherent whole. That's the application engineering side. So I've been involved in that. To answer your question, Ultravance is a constantly changing entity, but it is at its core about finding new business for UAV manufacturers, payload producers, and service providers.
Can you give us an example of how that works? Let's
say that a company needs a parachute, for example, and I work with a superb parachute manufacturer. Funny name for a company, Fruity Chutes, great manufacturer, spectacular parachutes, very high drag parachutes. So let's say company A that's making a platform. Let's say it's a fixed wing tier 2 60-pound plane. They need a parachute. And so I start talking to that company about parachutes. Well, then I understand that there are other things. Maybe they need communication equipment. Maybe they need a particular kind of payload, whatever. And ultimately, I'm able to help them kind of fashion a better solution for the market as a whole, because I help put the rest of the elements that they need together. And, I'm pretty well versed in EO/IR, stabilized camera systems, and a variety of different technologies, from synthetic aperture radar to mapping to a number of others.
How did you meet Mike Pick of SkyFallX?
I met Mike and his dad, Bill, at a trade show, and I was really impressed by what I saw. I'm technology driven. It's kind of my engineering bent, I think. And when I saw what Mike had, I thought, oh man, He's using a microgyro, an accelerometer. He's got a microprocessor. It's a brilliant little, simple to use, easy to mount automatic parachute system. And because I was working with parachutes already, I understood that what Mike had created was important, because having a parachute is a wonderful thing. Having a good parachute is a great thing. But you need to have an automatic mechanism that senses that the flight of the aircraft is anomalous, right? It's outside its flight envelope. It's pitching or rolling or dropping too dramatically. And what Mike had created was he had created a system that detected flight that was outside of the norm, flight characteristics that were potentially dangerous that could then be used to help trigger this automatic parachute system. So I actually started working with Mike originally as a vendor to put parachutes together with his sensing technology. And then once, we had started working together a little bit more, me as a vendor on the supplier side and him as the creator of this technology, then we started talking about, well, geez, maybe there's a way. And Mike had actually asked me if there was a way that I could help them maybe kind of promote their technology. And so that's how I became involved with Mike.
As you see things, where is SkyFallX today?
Mike has a great technology. He's got a patent that's with a very early filing date. And we think that we have the earliest filing date, and we think that the IP has a lot of value and a lot of claims that are general and broad in scope and hopefully meaningful. But what we're looking for are strategic partners that will help us start to fill orders. So we have hundreds of people that want these products, and some of them are people who are, involved with companies that could order fairly large numbers of finished units, but we don't have the units in production yet. And that's the kind of partnership we're looking for, manufacturing partner to help us get into production.
What type of drones are best suited for the parachute system?
I think, you've got to look at the cost benefit, right? If it's a $100 multicopter that you're not going to put a $150 parachute system on it. If it's a $1,500 system, and you're hanging a $500 GoPro Black on it or any number of other gimbals, you start getting into an environment where $150 on a parachute is kind of cheap insurance. And nothing is absolutely foolproof. And I will never go on record saying this is the answer to every problem you might experience, right? But it is a major step forward in terms of reducing the risk to people on the ground and their property. And so for us, it's a modular design. So it's designed in such a way that it's a complete, fully self-contained unit. It has its own battery. If the power on the multicopter fails, it's not going to affect whether or not the parachute can deploy. If there's an autopilot error, it doesn't matter to the parachute because it's got its own accelerometer and microgyro built in. So the answer to your question is anything that's within its capacity to slow the descent to a reasonable rate. So that's a mass question, right? Is it 3 pounds or less? That's a $150 solution from SkyFallX. If it's more than that, well, then it takes a bigger parachute, and the parachutes can be more expensive, obviously. But the sensing technology remains the same, and it doesn't really matter if it's a 200-pound or a 2,000-pound, There are some physical laws that the Mike's sensing circuit and the software that he created address. And so then it's just a scale factor. It's an issue about how do you deploy the parachute? What is the mechanism for actually ejecting the parachute? And that can change as the parachute gets larger. But the core technology, the important stuff, is in the brains of the system. And that's what Mike did so well.
Can you talk about the potential user market for the parachutes?
We've had meaningful conversations with several of the top 10 drone manufacturers on Earth. And we're in some of those discussions currently. Whether or not they're going to actually result in a deal, I don't know. But the obvious choice is the usual list of suspects in terms of manufacturers. We all kind of know who those top 10 are. And I don't think I should be more specific than that right now, but there's interest. Some VC funds, some venture capital companies, and then also companies that are flying more expensive payloads, right? A 3-pound Phantom 3 or 4, that's a good candidate and it works well for that. But there are some systems out there that weigh just a few pounds that are multiples more expensive. And those kinds of aircraft also have an interest in using this kind of technology.
Once deployed, does the user have to repack the parachute, or does he just swap out another pack from the company?
No, it's easy to reload. The instructions are online. There's a video showing how to repack it. A few folds and then roll. And you want to make sure that you're not jamming it back into the launch tube, but it's not a difficult thing to do. I did it a few times before I started to really fly more avidly with it because, I wanted to make sure that I was doing it correctly. And it took half an hour of practice to make sure that it was a routinely reliable fold and pack. But you can repack it multiple times, dozens and dozens of times. And, I was doing it because I think it's kind of fun. I mean, I was a model rocketeer as a kid. And the most exciting part, apart from the liftoff of an Estes rocket, is when the chute pops. I mean, that's kind of what you're waiting for. And so with Mike's system, I just do it for fun.
Yeah, I was a model rocketeer as well when I was a kid. And I also remember waiting for that pop. And sometimes it never came.
Oh, yeah, that's the other thing, right? And then good luck trying to find the rocket.
Right.
Right.
So getting back on message, in looking for strategic partners, what are some of the challenges in finding them and then getting them to come on board?
Well, it's calling for some creativity. There are a few people who have stated that they're interested, a few entities, right? People that represent other companies that have expressed an interest in being strategic investors, strategic partners. And what I didn't know at the beginning of this process is strategic can mean follow on. So there's a lot of interest in being the second to the table. And so that's the chicken and egg, cart and horse thing where you're trying to get things in the right order, but somebody has to be first. And so that's a challenge. We have a very large potential partner who has told us that, fine, we're interested, we're intrigued, we want to go further, we want to do more due diligence, but we need to know that you have other people already vested in this, apart from the original investors. And so it's been a little tricky. Another tricky thing is people coming into the fray as other solution providers. And that's a tricky thing because we're of the opinion and we are of the belief right now that we have the earliest filing date. But, the technology has also had some visibility. It's been shown at 2 trade shows. It won second place at the Commercial Drone Expo as being the most interesting new technology. So people have seen it, and that can breed competition. Now, I'm not saying it did in this case, but it would appear that there are other companies now that are kind of showing an interest in similar kinds of solutions. And again, it's our belief that we're first to file. So I think ultimately that IP is going to be important. But it adds to the challenges that we face.
With more than 400,000 drones that have been registered so far, and with the expected growth in the industry, doesn't it make sense from an investor's point of view that there's a huge market for a system like this?
Yeah, I agree. And you would think that would be obvious, right? And in fact, I didn't think that was going to be a note that I was going to have to hammer home too aggressively. But in fact, I actually was one of the less ceremonious meetings I had was when I went to a VC company and I was trying to talk about, wax poetic about, according to Price Waterhouse and according to Forbes magazine, et cetera, I was trying to quote the statistics about how many multicopters had been sold. They essentially almost showed me the door. They said, the first and foremost thing you never want to do is talk about the general market size. That's a kiss of death, which was a lesson I learned about, VC funding and going before VCs, because I thought, like you, I think we're just expressing it's important to know what the potential market size is to see if it's worth getting involved with. What is the cost of becoming involved in a technology like this versus what's the potential reward? And it's hard because a lot of these companies, a lot of the major drone manufacturers are not publishing a lot of information about how many of a particular model of their drone they have produced. It's kind of hard to nail that down specifically.
So are you saying they're not really that concerned with the total number of drones that are sold?
On the one hand, I think they probably feel it's a given and that it's obvious. On the other hand, I have had situations more than once where people say, our understanding is, and this has come from some fairly knowledgeable investors in the UAV, UAS space, saying that sales were not what was expected, that the numbers did not meet the expectations. And my response to that is, well, okay, so they were expecting 1 million units sold in December and 800,000 were sold. It's like a lot is still a lot.
No, you're right. But turning to where you go from here, what type of things are you doing to move the company forward?
I think that a conversation like the one we're having is important to try to just get the word out so that people understand that there's an opportunity for other people to become involved in the technology at an early stage. So I think trying to communicate to people that there isn't a lot of money that's required to get to the next step of actually starting to fill orders. And, trying to let people know that there is an opportunity like this.
If we could, I'd like to talk about you and about your background. Now, you've been involved with technology for several years. Can you pick a point in your career where you feel your path through the tech industry really started and was defined?
Well, I came to California as a screenwriter. I had written a screenplay that was optioned it went through 20th Century Fox. It was in a company called Spirit Productions. I had written the screenplay. I didn't really know what to expect, if anything, from it. And as it turned out, I got enough money from it to, encourage me that this was a good thing, right? That writing was actually going to be profitable and I could actually do it. However, when you're writing a screenplay, you're sitting in a room by yourself week after week, month after month. And I'm not really well geared for that. It turns out I'm much better at actually being out of the dark enclosed space. And I came across stereolithography. Chuck Hall at 3D Systems had created 3D printing, the first incarnation of 3D printing, and I became involved with a company called Cycon Technologies. I came across the technology, and I was so enamored with it. The second I saw it, you point a laser into a tank of liquid plastic. Everywhere the laser hits the plastic, it causes the plastic to cure. It's a photo-initiated photopolymer that's reactive to a certain wavelength of light, and the laser introduces that wavelength of light in a very narrow beam in a very precise way, and then you draw parts. You want a deck of cards, you build them a card at a time, one card on top of another. But so I became involved with 3D printing because at the time I was still writing, but to be honest, the 3D printing thing really stoked a fire. It was as close to being the transporter from Star Trek as you could imagine. And the day after I saw it, I could not sleep, literally. And I was up all night creating proposals for this company to try to encourage them to bring me on. And so I met them one day. I spent all night putting together proposals and marketing ideas and talking points and props, actually. And that's where the whole idea of building a layered object as though you were going to build a deck of cards, one card at a time. That's where that came from, because I took that deck of cards in, presented it to the company, and they were so shocked that somebody would do that they hired me on the spot. I spent 8 years there. We grew from 5 employees to 125. We didn't know what we had. We didn't really understand the technology or what it was going to be good for. And I realized that it was particularly good at small, complex, high-feature parts, things that you would find in the medical business, for example, syringes, catheters, Lurolux, things of that sort. So I took our company to the Medical Design Manufacturing Show. We were the first rapid prototyping company to exhibit at that show. Our business essentially tripled overnight. We went from barely holding on to barely being able to keep up. And that action created they now have an entire pavilion at the Medical Design Manufacturing Show, which is one of the largest, if it's not the largest, medical design manufacturing trade shows on Earth. Today, there will be dozens and dozens of companies showing all manner of rapid prototyping. But we were the first, and that really launched the business.
Was it a business where you were producing 3D products for others, or were you producing 3D technology so others could make their products?
We were primarily an engineering house. We did 3D modeling at a time when people were still using 2D drawings, right? This is 1991, 92, 93. And so we were converting 2D drawings into 3D solid models. So fully dimensioned computer models. And then we were creating plastic parts from those models. And then we were also working with DuPont at the time doing photopolymer, helping them and working with them in terms of their creation of new photopolymers for use in the system, ones that were more, they had better properties. Because at the time, we were using cyanoacrylate, which was carcinogenic, almost in the extreme in the liquid condition. And it was very brittle. It was far from a perfect medium to make anything out of. But DuPont had other ideas, and they were starting to use vinyl ether, which was another kind of material, which had much better material properties than cyanoacrylate.
It has to be pretty exciting for you to look back at those initial challenges at that time and now see how the 3D industry has evolved.
Yeah, I think that being the kind of person that is inherently brilliant, as Chuck Hull is, as honestly Mike Pick is with SkyFallX, as are the guys in New Zealand, Gabriel Engels and some of the others that created 3D LCD monitors that I worked with for years and actually created some technology for. That was one of my contributions there from an engineering standpoint, some technology that Boeing studied under contract, I was happy about that because it was something that I'd actually contributed, then resulted in revenue. But all these guys are wonderful, right? They're spectacular individuals. They have this talent. But there's the other element, and that is somebody's got to sometimes find the application for it. Like stereolithography, we didn't really have that nailed down initially. We didn't really understand what it was going to be good for. And it wasn't until I did comparative analysis of all the parts that we were making, what did they have in common, that it became clear what should we be pursuing as a possible application for the technology. Again, the term application engineering. What is that technology really going to be good for? And I've seen this repeated over and over and over again, that somebody creates something that's really new and novel, but they don't really know why it's important. And that's, a lot of the value in just pure research, honestly. But it takes somebody to actually push the technology.
Did you see any of that in the rise of the UAV industry?
Oh, it's happening right now. We're starting to get a better idea of some of the applications. But we don't really know. Guys start talking about flying magnetometers and detecting mineral deposits and oil reserves and groundwater. And some of the technologies that we're using, the multispectral and the hyperspectral, the creative ways people can use those things, persistent vision, being able to do regression chronologically in time by having a platform in the air over a period of time. There's all sorts of really fascinating things. And I don't think we really know yet whether it's going to be restricted to just, and I'm not saying that this isn't a valuable activity, but it may not just be dropping antibiotics in the jungle. It may be doing much more than that, and it will be. And I think we're in the process of deciding how to apply the technology right now. Self-driving cars, a good example. All of that technology, all of the autonomous stuff is just coming into its own.
And if we follow that same path, there should be some new opportunities and innovation that might happen over the next several years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, on the autonomous side of things, certainly.
Now, you also wrote a book about technology sales called Bulletproof Salesman. What was that about?
So I worked for some time with a friend of mine named Bruce Seymour. And Bruce and I were working together as employees, American employees of a New Zealand headquartered company. At the time it was called Deep Video and then later renamed as Pure Depth. And Bruce and I were dealing with all manner of different possible applications for 3D, this particular type of 3D LCD monitor. And it was a very interesting period of time, really interesting technology. It turns out that seeing things in depth reduces your reaction time to information, much better than color or symbology. So if you actually throw something at someone, it's a visceral, autonomic almost response. They act before they think based on a change in depth. Whereas if you change the color, even if it goes from green to yellow to red, you still have to process that. And we get good at processing the information, but let's say it takes a couple of hundred milliseconds. Whereas if somebody throws something at you, your response is instantaneous. And that can be important in certain areas. So anyway, I was working with Bruce Seymour at the time, and Bruce kept bothering me. He kept saying, we need to write a book. He was saying, you need to write a book. You need to write a book about this stuff. Because we were having good experiences even then. I mean, my professional life has been enjoyable. It's been entertaining. And there have been a lot of, interesting experiences. So he was saying, you got to write a book. And I kept resisting. I resisted for a year. And the reason is I didn't want to show my hand. I mean, some of the techniques, and not techniques, but some of the methods that I use, which work very well, are not things that I want to be known in general, for general consumption. But Bruce was relentless, as any good salesperson is. And he finally said, look, I'll write a chapter, and then you write a chapter. And then I'll write a chapter, and then you'll write a chapter. And I said, yeah, right. Good luck. Let me know when you have that first chapter done. So the next day, this chapter arrives virtually. I mean, it was like within hours almost, because he probably already had it written, but this is my remembrance of the way things happen. And so then I was on the hook. And so ultimately, then we went back and forth. And we actually had enough chapters to publish 2 books. But, we winnowed it down to the ones that we thought were kind of entertaining and then put them into Bulletproof Salesman.
For those that get the book, what will they learn and get out of reading it?
If they actually do what is explained and described in the book, then they have a much better chance of being successful in sales. So it's meant to be an entertaining, kind of anecdotal self-help book on how to become a professional technical salesperson.
Is the book still available if someone is interested? Can they buy it on Amazon?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. Productive Publications in Toronto actually published the book, and it's still available. As far as I know, it's still available. And then it's also available online at, Amazon. It used to be available in a number of places, but it was published, I believe, in 2004.
What have you learned through your writing career that might be of interest to others?
I think technical sales is a wonderful career choice. It's challenging, it's difficult, but it will take you anywhere in the world you want to go, literally, physically. And it's been a rewarding way for me to spend time. And I think, honestly, it's had some meaning in terms of getting technologies adopted. Coming
back to drones, where we started, what do you see happening today that really piques your interest?
Well, 107.2, Part 107, I mean, this is major. And how we all interpret what the FAA has decided, at least for this moment in time, and I hope it's still a work in process, because I think we still have a long way to go, especially in beyond line of sight flights, which is what I'm most interested in, is, certainly beyond visual line of sight, and then beyond line of sight in general, for really over the horizon stuff. I think that 107 is really significant in the fine points and in the fine interpretations of what they wrote. I did some work with a company called UAS, and they came out with a sub 1 ounce ADS-B transponder. That's huge.
What does that do? I'm not familiar with it, so what makes it huge?
So let's say that you are in any commercial airliner by 2020, and virtually anything that flies, by 2020, you're going to be required to have automatic dependent surveillance broadcast equipment on board. What that does is that tells everybody else that's in the air and who is interested and on the ground, like air traffic control, where you are, at what altitude, what airspeed, and heading in what direction. And so there's all sorts of things you can do in terms of collision avoidance using ADS-B. And all you really need to read the information is an ADS-B receiver, which can be just a few grams, and an iPad, for example. And these things have gone from being something that's 100,000 to being something that's 10,000 to being something that's a few $100. And so I think that's going to play a huge role in collision avoidance, sense and avoid. It won't be see and avoid, but sense and avoid traffic. And I definitely see a time when our urban landscape is going to be populated, much like it is in Blade Runner, only in a different way. Be a lot of autonomous vehicles flying at some version of a flight level, separated by 100 feet, going one direction, at this heading is this, even number feet, and this heading in the opposite direction is at odd number feet or whatever. But ADS-B could play a part in that. So that's also an interesting technology.
And where do you see SkyFallX as a technology advancement?
SkyFallX, I think, is really important. It's all about kinetic energy. You take a little tiny thing and you get it going really fast, and it's a deadly bullet, right? You take that same bullet and you hand it to somebody, and it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It has no kinetic energy to it, no meaningful kinetic energy. So what Mike has done is by bringing the kinetic energy down on these drones, he's reduced them from being this projectile that's falling out of the sky that has mass and velocity, and reduced it down to something that could be descending at a very slow speed and not have the same damaging impact, right? And so I think that's important. I think SkyFallX is important technology. I think it's going to be ultimately very profitable, but I also think just by its nature, it's important. So I think that's exciting.
That's it for episode 62 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Steve Smith of Ultravance Corporation, and I want to thank Steve for sharing his story. If you want to learn more about Ultravance, or if you want to connect with Steve, check out their website at www.ultravance.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Drone Radio Show, please leave a positive review on iTunes. It really does help. And I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.